Some people go through entire storms without telling anyone it's raining. They carry stress quietly. They solve problems alone. They sit with confusion, pressure, and emotional weight, and nobody knows how heavy it really is. And if you ask them why they didn't reach out, they'll often say the same thing. I didn't want to bother anyone. Or, I'll figure it out. Or simply, it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. Because people who don't ask for help aren't just independent. They've learned something deeper about themselves, about others, and about what it means to rely on someone. And that learning leaves patterns. Patterns you can see, if you know where to look. One of the first traits is that they pause before expressing need. Not because they don't have needs, but because their brain automatically runs a silent calculation. They think about timing. They think about the other person's mood. They think about whether their problem is serious enough. They think about whether they should just handle it alone. Even when something hurts, there's hesitation. You'll see it in small moments. They type a message asking for help, then delete it. They open up slightly, then change the subject. They minimize their own situation while listening fully to everyone else's. This isn't accidental. It's a form of emotional self-containment. Somewhere along the way, they learned that expressing need didn't always lead to relief. Sometimes it led to disappointment. Sometimes it led to being misunderstood. Sometimes it led to feeling exposed. So now, their nervous system chooses caution first, because caution feels safer than vulnerability. Another trait is that they become extremely good at solving their own problems. Not because they enjoy the pressure, but because they've had practice. A lot of practice. When you don't expect help, your brain adapts. It becomes resourceful. It becomes observant. It learns how to stabilize itself. They learn how to calm themselves down without reassurance. They learn how to make decisions without validation. They learn how to carry emotional weight without showing visible strain. From the outside, it looks like strength, and in many ways it is. But it's also adaptation. Because when asking for help doesn't feel like a reliable option, self-reliance becomes the default survival strategy. There's also a subtle emotional pattern underneath all of this. People who don't ask for help often feel more comfortable being the helper. They show up for others. They listen deeply. They support. They reassure. But when the roles reverse, something feels off. Receiving help can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Not because they don't appreciate it, but because it puts them in a position they're not used to occupying. The position of being seen as vulnerable. The position of being dependent, even briefly. And for someone whose identity is built around managing alone, that position can feel disorienting. So now they return to what feels stable, handling it themselves. There's also another behavior you might notice. They downplay their own struggles automatically. They'll say things like, "It's fine," or "It could be worse," or "I'll manage," even when internally it doesn't feel fine at all. This isn't dishonesty. It's regulation. It's the mind reducing emotional exposure in real time. Because acknowledging the full weight of something out loud makes it real in a different way. And when you've spent years containing your emotional reality privately, exposing it can feel like losing control of the container. And here's where it gets interesting. The real reason people don't ask for help isn't always independence. It's predictability. When you rely on yourself, outcomes feel more predictable. You know your own limits. You know your own effort. You know your own response. But when you rely on others, there's uncertainty. Will they understand? Will they respond the way you need? Will they show up fully or partially? Or not at all? And uncertainty creates emotional risk. So the brain chooses the path that feels more controllable. Self-reliance isn't just about strength. It's about reducing emotional unpredictability. It's about protecting stability. Over time, this becomes part of identity. They stop seeing themselves as someone who needs support. They see themselves as someone who provides it, someone who handles things, someone who doesn't break easily. And identity is powerful because once you see yourself a certain way, your behavior aligns with that image automatically, even when you're exhausted, even when you're overwhelmed, even when help is available. There's also a deeper emotional layer beneath all of this. People who don't ask for help are highly attuned to other people's emotional states. They notice tone shifts, energy changes, subtle signs of stress in others. And because of that awareness, they become careful. They don't want to add weight to someone who already seems heavy. They don't want to become another source of pressure. So they carry their own weight quietly, not because their pain is small, but because their empathy is large. This creates a quiet imbalance. They hold space for others, but rarely allow others to hold space for them. Not intentionally, just habitually. And over time, this habit becomes invisible, even to themselves. They stop recognizing their own need for support because managing alone feels normal, familiar, expected. There's also something else happening internally. When you don't ask for help, you develop a deep sense of personal responsibility. You feel accountable for fixing your own emotional states. If you're overwhelmed, you regulate yourself. If you're hurt, you process it privately. If you're lost, you find your own direction. This creates resilience, but it also creates isolation. Not always physical isolation, but emotional isolation. Because your inner world becomes something you experience mostly alone. And the longer this pattern exists, the more natural it feels. Not asking for help stops feeling like a decision. It starts feeling like who you are. But this pattern didn't appear randomly. It formed gradually, through experiences, through moments when asking didn't help, through moments when being strong felt necessary, through moments when relying on yourself was the most reliable option available. The brain remembers those moments, and it builds protective systems around them, not to limit you, but to protect you. That's why people who don't ask for help often appear calm on the outside, even when there's complexity inside, because they've learned how to contain complexity, how to function while carrying invisible weight, how to remain steady while processing uncertainty internally. It's not emotional absence, it's emotional management. And once you see this pattern, you start to recognize it everywhere. In the person who always says, "I'm good," without hesitation. In the person who listens more than they speak. In the person who shows strength so consistently that nobody questions whether they need support too. And maybe in yourself. Because not asking for help was never just about independence. It was about adaptation. It was about learning how to stay stable in environments where stability wasn't always guaranteed. It was about protecting your inner world in the most reliable way you knew how. And that awareness changes something. Because once you understand the pattern, you stop seeing it as random personality. You see it as history. You see it as identity. You see it as protection that became permanent. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It was never weakness. It was always a pattern. Quiet, consistent, and deeply human. If this explains something you've always felt but never named, there's more to uncover. Because understanding yourself is where everything begins.